our...
Has it been
I
5
like the way you
seconds?
do it.
Yeah, now we're live. Good job.
Oh, hey, good morning. Happy Sunday. Happy almost Memorial Day, I guess. Tomorrow's Memorial Day, right? I think.
Yep.
Well, okay, happy that. Today we are joined by Stefan from Rapid Travel Chai and a bunch of other things. That was a great introduction. So what do we actually... Do you want to introduce yourself, Tiffany? Do you want to introduce him? I'm sorry. It's raining here. I feel like I'm in Seattle as well because it's pouring. So it's a drowsy morning here.
Yeah, would love to introduce Stefan. So we have Stefan with us of, hang on, I have an error.
Okay.
Broadcast session. No, so we have Stefan here. Sorry, I got distracted by the technical situation.
Okay, I think Gil did it best. Hey, Stefan, and Sean says Eid Mubarak to all. I think that's the way we start.
No, I'm so excited. So we have Stefan of Rapid Travel Chai, which I just really like to say because it's my favorite blog name ever, and I like to get that in whenever I have the opportunity. And you also have your Facebook group, Every Passport Stamp, which is super relevant because you've been to not only every country, but places that others may not consider countries, like regions and territories, and including most recently you were in Antarctica, which I think we'll want to talk about. And just
way beyond the Hyatt footprint, that's right.
Yeah. And just before that you were in Syria. Just, common places for people to just pop in on a weekend.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you are in Seattle.
I am in Seattle. We've lived there the past 3 years. It's another beautiful sunny day. It rains a lot less than you would expect. And we have a beautiful balcony over Lake Union. So all things considered, we're doing very, very well.
I just have to admit, I have a really hard time calling you Stefan because I feel like the German in me, it's like Stefan. I feel like you should be, but that's okay. I accept it.
I learned to be very flexible about that because my father's from Brooklyn, New York, and they pronounce both my name and the state where I'm from however they feel like it, and the Germans do their way. And I realize that if I ever have children, I will pick a name that's impossible to spell differently and impossible to pronounce differently.
That is a great idea, though. I wonder what those names would be because
well, yeah, because you still end up with like international, like there's no hard T sound at the front of words in many languages.
And the J's are a problem too. Yeah. So I haven't had children, so I haven't solved the first the predicate for this.
So you've been
but
to
it's good to be thinking ahead.
You've been to every country and almost every territory or every special geographic thing. What's missing?
There's many lists, and if you're into this hobby, it's like the aviation geeks. There's a step in your relationship with the bar where you say, "Can I show you my list?" So we're not gonna go through that. I'm on the board of directors of Traveler Century Club. That's a club that's been around for 70 years. That's 329 territories, and I'm about 25 short on that. And then there's Most Traveled People, which is 800 something. There's Nomad Mania, which is 1281, and it gets insane, and it goes on and on. There's a list of 5,000 something, sort of like ISO type divisions plus other things. So it's however crazy you want to make it. But the one baseline is the UN member states, 193, and then the arguments start from there. So Taiwan is not a member state. Is it a country? What is it? It goes on and on like that. So,
what are the top 5 you have not been to that I would find very interesting, I guess, or that's like objectively the most like, how is that a thing that someone needs to go to? Because like, for example, when I was in Desroches Island in the Seychelles, or however you'd like to pronounce it, that's another thing. I'm not sure the pronunciation is correct, but there was a lady on our flight back. It was weird because this is like a secluded island in the Seychelles. She was there just for one night. And then like she sat across from us on the flight back. I think she's part of that because she said she was trying to check off Desroches Island, and then she was going to Somalia afterwards, I think. So very interesting lady.
As one does. It's right there, so you might as well.
I was there for the grand opening of the Desroches Island Resort for the exact same reason. I made sure that in Ben style I was the first one off the plane and ran in and checked in and was the first one to my room specifically for that. I think it's 5 times the price I've ever paid for a night stay anywhere, and that because that's the outer Seychelles. So places like El Dabra Atoll with the famous tortoises I'd love to see, but you're talking even much more expensive. So the main Seychelles is one geographic entity within Seychelles, and then how you divide up the islands and the outer islands, but they're some distance away. So I sent a number of people, maybe the one on your flight as well, to Desroches once I got there. So I'm thinking the one that jumped into mind aviation-wise that I haven't been to is Ascension, which I don't know how much you know about that. So it's the island is almost entirely dedicated to a joint U.S. and U.K. Air Force base. And there's 5 nationalities that are prohibited from entering the island at all at this time. And one of them is Chinese. On the RMS St. Helena, when I visited St. Helena and Tristan da Cunha, I didn't continue to Ascension. It would have been another 2 weeks, and I wish I had in hindsight. But
what else do you have to do?
I didn't know how it was. I'd never been on a cruise, and it was totally different than any cruise you imagine. And it was this wonderful cultural slice. The governor of the territory, and all kinds, locals going for medical treatment, everything. But so Ascension, as I said, 5 nationalities can't go there. This one, Chinese, I think she arranged that she could get in the landing vessel and sort of touch the sand and go back. But the normal way is this RAF flight from Breeze Norton in England that stops in Ascension and then continues to the Falkland Islands. And that's been diverted to Cabo Verde for the past few years while they've been repairing the runway in Ascension. And so that flight, I think, Ben, that would be a particular interest to you when it resumes, is to take that flight, Breeze Norton to Ascension to Falklands. And otherwise, it's not necessarily the most beautiful island in the world, I've heard. I think one of the early explorers described it as it looks like the landscape is on fire and and burned down. But so that's the kind of thing. It's a quirky thing in aviation history that I think you would connect with.
The flight to St. Helena, that continues once a month to somewhere. That's not Ascension?
That's Ascension, yeah.
Oh, that's Ascension, okay.
Yeah, so you could visit that. So it's a much smaller plane than the RAF planes, of course, because these RAF planes are big military planes that you're not riding in luxury at all.
But can anyone book that, if it's other than the nationalities that are excluded?
Other than the 5, yeah. You have to count. There is an Ascension Island tourism website, and you have to contact the government. The flight between St. Helena and Ascension is on a charter basis. So the flight from South Africa to St. Helena, you can book as a normal not every OTA programs St. Helena, but you can book it as a normal air ticket through public sources. The Ascension, you need to get the clearance. You need to book it. They don't really have the functioning hotel closed a couple years ago at the runway, so they have to find a place for you to sleep. But the issue is the flight, as it's been running during this period, is once a month, and you get in about 8 p.m. and you have to be back. There's hours of security because of the base. So you have to be back right at first thing in the morning, or you stay a month. This past year, they did do an extra flight in December and an extra one in January, so you could be there for 2 weeks. I was hoping for a 1-week option, but and there are some occasional boats that do go there.
Would you have a desire to actually go for like a week, or you just obviously want to be there more than just for an overnight? Like, is there stuff to do? I know you're saying it's not the most beautiful island, it sounds like, but
St. Helena, I had a few days and wished I had a week and didn't expect that.
Really?
St. Helena is really diverse, and Ascension is smaller and more limited hiking, but I could imagine a week would be enjoyable. And these spots that are really, really remote and small populations, I think you've been to, sort of like the Faroe Islands. It's such a different feel than Iceland that experiencing that. I'm from the U.S. I lived in China for a decade, and as much as cultures can be different, living as a big country culture is a very different thing than small countries. So I feel like in my business career, relating to, say, Chinese, Russians, Indians, as an American, I feel a lot more similarity, where I feel it can be very foreign and disorienting to, say, deal with the British, which it's just a very different outlook, even if the language seems similar. So the small places, say like Saba in the Caribbean. I think you've been to Saba. With the famous runway, that the shortest commercial runway in the world. I don't know.
Is that St. Bart's Airport?
No, Saba. So it's in the same neighborhood. St. Bart's is the one with it's like you're landing right over the hill, right over town. Saba, you have to fly from St. Martin, and it's the one. It's nestled. There's no real beaches. It's a mountain type island. It's very GLBTQ friendly. very small population. It's very young now because there's a medical school there, so it's brought in a very young population. And a lot of Av geeks just go to take the flight and go back, but uh, because it is you'll see all these YouTube videos. They call it the most dangerous landing in the world or something. But these little places where it is small enough that everybody knows who they are and everybody's connected in some way, I find fascinating and would like to experience more.
Very cool. That's
really fun. So for people who don't know you, and some people are asking, do you want to talk a little bit about living in China? Like where in China you lived and how that.
Yeah, sure. So
I know you're looking as though you can see the questions, but you can't see the questions unless you.
Oh, actually, no. I opened the YouTube feed, so I was saying I was about to say, Craig asked, "Have I been to Easter Island?" Yes, it's excellent. That's one that doesn't take a long stay. I think 2 or 3 days. There's limited diving, but otherwise you see the heads. They're incredible, and you keep seeing them and seeing them until you're tired of them. And Sean said that big plane ran from Accra to Ascension, so there you go. But China. So I studied Chinese in high school. My high school in Minneapolis, Minnesota, had Chinese. My wonderful teacher, which Tiffany has met before, will be a guest on one of my EPS live streams coming soon. Just celebrated her 80th birthday last week. So got me into Chinese, and school trip to China my junior year was the first big trip. My parents are workaholics, so it was Disney when I was 4. And then next time was my caddying money when I was 13. I said, I have money, you're taking me to Wisconsin Dells. And so junior year of high school, getting to China, was just an incredible experience. So then I spent in college a semester in Shanghai, a semester in Hong Kong. And then when I graduated college, I went to University of Pennsylvania, Wharton in Philadelphia. And then when I graduated, I moved to Shanghai and found different internships and then jobs, and spent just about a decade Shanghai, Qingdao, Tianjin, Beijing, and traveled every province of China while I was there. And that's where I really got the travel bug. I go back to China once or twice a year. We would be there right now for the spring, all the spring vegetables and the wonderful food that they have in the spring. It is harder because of internet connectivity and that. So generally, the past few years, we've been, say, spending one of the 2 trips in Hong Kong or Taiwan or Japan or South Korea, where we can have good connectivity and be working uninterrupted and not hopping 3, 4, 5 different VPNs. But it's a wonderful, exciting, totally crazy place, and in some ways that I can be very fine, very relaxed. I love the chill Seattle environment, but there's something about how it's a bit like Richard Scarry's Busy Town. If if that was part of your childhood, where just things are always happening in China, new businesses starting, excitement, activity, that it really is exciting. And say if you want to be an entrepreneur, heading that way and just seeing all the things people are trying out, and that is a lot of fun.
I love that. It makes me think of, you were talking about once your mother-in-law's suburb, basically, where she is outside of Shanghai, and all of the infrastructure and everything that's happening. There's more going on there than there is in Manhattan, and it's not even in the city as such.
Yeah, we actually we set up my mother-in-law with a little Airbnb experience, how to cook Shanghainese food, because there's very few Shanghainese class. If it says like how to make dumplings, it's not a Shanghai teacher, I'll put it that way. But the idea is roughly a gated community, but it shouldn't have the same assumption of what it is like in the US, because gated community is just it's a holdover from decades ago, but it could be the very low income to extremely high income. But hers is I'm trying to think, it's like 20,000 people or so, and one down the street is much bigger, and I think it's 80,000 families within one gated community. So there's a hospital, there's schools, there's multiple bus networks, there's several shopping centers, all within the actual gated community. So it's on a totally different scale than you might be thinking, and that's during the virus lockdown stuff that they've had, which is now loosening up. Those gated communities, essentially, they set up passports to go in and out, where there's always security guards at all of these. It's not the security guards are more of a formality. You're not thinking of like a Brazil situation with safety,
It's
but
more like an Arizona situation.
yeah, the infrastructure is there, and so all these delivery networks that you've been reading about on the news, the delivery would be on one side of the security, the entrance to these communities, and they would literally have like pulleys and nets and things to put deliveries over the gate. And so people, that's part of how people were able to be cordoned off in a way, but it's not the same what we're thinking of, because again, you've got all this stuff inside. You can
Right,
get,
you're cordoned within
I mean,
80,000
with my
people and two
mother-in-law's, I think
hospitals.
trying to think there's 5 different barber shops within my mother-in-law's gated community. So it's not about just not getting one, one haircut. You have your choice of them.
Syria, when were you there?
Syria, I was there in August. So this is the miles and points success story. So why did I get into miles and points? My wife was doing an MBA in New York, and somehow in some newsletter I heard about the first frequent traveler university in Flushing, Queens. There was a precocious young kid about to start college from Florida there amongst the speakers, and my parents came along because they were in New York visiting me, and my father said these are all schemers and con artists after the weekend. But for me, I said, this is not travel. This is not what I thought when I heard the name. But I was going to a lot of remote places, and the places without tourism are often the most expensive cash-wise. A 1-hour flight in Africa could be $500 or so. So flash forward, goal to get to every country in the world. And
Did you already have that
ago,
goal, like buried deep in your, did you already have the goal of visiting every country in the world, like buried deep in your soul? Or was it just, hey, this might be possible, I should do
it's the
it?
collector part. So almost everyone that does that or attempts it, it's either because they're an Instagram blogger or Instagrammer that wants to have the yoga picture in every country, or it's
That's
something.
you, right?
I'm sorry. Yeah,
I said
me.
that's you, right?
Yeah, and I've never done the reverse Jesus the Redeemer thing over the canyon picture and all that. I not not my thing. But the other thing is the collecting. So it's like a stamp collecting or whatever. So I was one that when I was 3 and 4 of a birthday party, my parents would cringe if a kid would give me, say, like a GI Joe that I had never had before. But then I would immediately go to the catalog and say, I'm going to have all of them, kind of, and save up to get all of the set and that. So yeah, one of my mother's stories she always brings up is I really wanted this Transformer that collected. It was like 6 or 7 and it was impossible to find that Christmas. And I kept talking about it, and then a week before I changed my mind, and she had assembled every single one and gotten them, and then it turns out she gave up and returned it, and I had no idea. And but so when you start traveling, is it something that you start looking? I started traveling in China. I was a student in Hong Kong. I arranged classes so it would be Monday to Wednesday night, and then I would just take the subway up to Shenzhen and just get on whatever bus or train. And I started filling in the map and putting dots on the map. And so that collecting just starts. Then around Asia and just kept expanding. So 2 years ago, I had two UN territories left. Yemen, which last April, Socotra Island opened up. They call the Galapagos of the Indian Ocean, a fantastic spot. Got to go there. And then I was working on Syria. I was approaching a round-numbered birthday and really wanted it to happen. I had lost money on fixers. I had tried for 2 years to get a visa to Syria. It wasn't happening. And all of this of the backdrop of feeling very guilty because it's like the ultimate entitled American thing. It's like people are dying and suffering in a real crisis there, and I'm just trying to go there as a tourist. So, but the rationalization is that if I'm able to go as a tourist, then it means there's an uptick in the economy. There's some peace coming back. So that's the way I rationalize it. But I kept pursuing this. And finally, last August, about 2 weeks before my birthday, I had given up. And then one of the guides and fixers that I was trying that I hadn't heard for like 2 months, she said, the tourism minister said it looks good. It's already the weekend here, Friday. You may know by Monday. And this was a week before Labor Day. And I said, if you tell me on Monday, I will be there on Tuesday in Beirut. And so she told me, and Air France had 34,000 miles for Seattle to Paris to Beirut, and I was there the next night and crossed the border.
And was she just blown away?
That was one of the most. I mean, it really brought me to tears, and I probably will if I go through the whole story. But as I learned about her particular story, the one who got me the visa, Gaida, and I've had her speak to my high school in Minneapolis now since, and in other groups. She's a Palestinian refugee, so her parents from the different troubles in the 90s. I'm not an expert of history in the region, but a lot of the trouble in the 90s, Syria took in a huge amount of refugees from Palestine and other neighboring countries during different battles and wars, and a number of these people have stayed and are permanent residents. So she showed me her document. It's a stateless person document, but she's allowed legally to live in Syria. She just cannot travel anywhere because no state will accept her as a stateless person. So her thing was, I travel vicariously through you all. So that her brother was killed in the fighting because he had studied in Iran, and so he was associated, just guilty by association when that was found out. So there's incredibly tragic stories as hoteliers with a little old mansion that they renovated 30 years ago and haven't had a customer in 10 years, and so you see all these kind of encounters. So that was the UN 193 for me. Had a muted type of celebration, but got to meet some incredible people, and it's an interesting country in that it is incredibly religiously and culturally diverse, and myself and many who visited in the past year, I mean, it feels like this is the last place that there would be this brutal conflict, and it's the incredible people you meet and the resourcefulness. One tour guide, he was the state translator for dignitaries from any Spanish-speaking country. He's had to bake wedding cakes for the past 10 years. You encounter all these kind of stories, and they're very moving and inspiring of how people have persevered.
One of the things that I loved when you were on your way back, I think you texted me that just one of the things that was so interesting was seeing people moving back to the city. And you were like, just sort of this mentality, and maybe this was just this one family. It's like, oh, well, we got this part of the apartment livable, so now more people can come back, and then we'll do the next part, and we'll do the next part. And
I'd say Homs, which is one of the major cities and suffered at least a third of it on the northern side. A number of these cities, the northern third or half, is just totally in ruins, and so they're talking about they'd try to repair one room in the family home. So like maybe the father and the uncle come and they're just camping out. I mean, they're just, and they just try to build a roof and get some kind of plumbing or something back and repair one room so then the next can open, and then, bring back more of the family, and through that whole process. And people are very honest and open about the suffering that's going on. I heard air raids flying overhead. I was far away from any fighting. But
how many days were you there for?
I was there for just about 5 days. So actually, I was given a 2-week visa, but I had business commitments in New York that I really couldn't change, and my parents and family coming to New York at the same time for my birthday. So I would have liked to go further. Palmyra is one that is possible to visit now, but it takes an additional permit, and it was going to take another 1 to 2 weeks in processing time that I really wanted the birthday before my birthday. So I went, but pretty much the whole the Aleppo road just opened a few weeks ago, and the cities in the middle, all the way south to the Jordanian border, all the way west. So places like Tartus on the coast, a lot of areas have opened up. And this is, of course, going with official visas, either overland from Beirut, overland from Amman, or the occasional flight that goes in. This is not entering by other means, certainly not the Turkey border or the areas that are not controlled by the Syrian government.
Did you have a guide the whole time, or could you roam freely?
You could roam freely. So in the cities, just roam freely as much as want. There's tons of checkpoints for everyone, and so I had all the permits with the guides, and I was happy to have guide and driver. I know some tourists who have gotten all the permits and taken public transport, and that is feasible. There was never a situation of the many checkpoints. There was never a situation of a bribe or a hassle or anything. My documents were in order. It checked out. So it
feel unsafe at any point, or totally fine?
Yeah, it's it's all relative,
Of course.
I suppose. Yeah, everything is in terms of the permits and all of that. It's not just for tourists, but also domestic travelers to go to areas that are safe, or if they're going somewhere else. Like I said, the Aleppo Road is open now. It was closed because it went within 30 miles or so of some of the fighting in the Idlib region at the time. So it was nobody, local transport, nobody could go on it. So I had no intention and no desire to go to any area anywhere near fighting. The areas I was in, say like Hama is a city famous for its water wheels, and there was not much fighting anywhere during the conflict there. And that's part of the, you see these movies say about World War II, and you see these destroyed towns, but part of these things, part of these things about war is you start to see visiting a place like this is a town a mile away might be destroyed, and the one nearest will be totally untouched in that. So Hama was not particularly directly impacted, and say one restaurant we went to in a village nearby, the kids were having their high school graduation party. And why were they having it in August? They said, well, not everybody passes the graduation exams the first time, so we wait till everybody graduates so we can have a big party. And you think these kids have gone through their middle school and high school through all of this, and so everybody at the restaurant gets pulled into the party and dancing and all of that. So it
You dance?
no, I do not dance. It's sort of moved in the direction of it, but the swirling circle of it.
I'm like everyone in the restaurant, including Stefan, because.
But I will say it's as big of a party for the parents as the kids, and they're separate, but they're all together, and so it's not. It's not like hanging around with high school kids. It was clearly as much for the parents, and our tables were over by the parents. So I didn't talk to the kids directly, but it was a lot of the parents that had learned English multilingual from, again, a country that previously had been extremely connected to the world and has been cut off the past decade plus.
Yeah, so for people who are interested in going to some of these more difficult destinations, I'm going to link to your Facebook group, which is the Every Passport Stamp, and it's so helpful. I love that you have the baseline rule of if your question can be found on the first or possibly even the second page of Google, it's not a question for the group. But it's a great resource for the, like, who do I contact about a visa here? How do I get transportation? And it seems like a really knowledgeable group of people who have been a lot of very random places. And
it doesn't need to be extreme like this, but some it's like they're a stamp collector, and so they want stamps from all the British territories. So how do I get the flight schedule to Tuvalu that Fiji Airways flies? I mean, it can be, there's a special exhibition going on in France, and I don't know how to get tickets, for the show. So it's not all focused
inevitably
on
there's
that,
somebody who's like, oh, my you talked to so and so, and
I think the best example of last year, Sierra Leone, which has incredible, it's been a lot of strife, but it's incredible beaches and been peaceful for some years and trying to rebuild their tourism industry. Last year, they started announcing that maybe a visa on arrival was going to be available, and all the media reports were maybe it's starting, maybe it's not. Embassies aren't asking questions, and somebody shared it, and within like a minute, somebody replied, "Oh, I just went through yesterday. I took a screenshot of the visa on arrival form. Here's the list. Here's the document." Because embassies in general.
And here's what you need. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of embassies of even very developed countries that require a visa but have a visa on arrival now, the embassy won't tell you about the visa on arrival because they want to sell you a visa themselves. So the best resource is Thematic that the airlines use and see, and that will tell you if there's a visa on arrival for your nationality, as well as some of these crowdsourced things. And the Syria visa I only got because of people in the group, and during this quarantine to help people that are antsy, including myself, I've been doing these daily video streams that you're welcome to attend, and it was actually interviewed a woman that I knew nothing about her except out of the blue, she just started listing all of the guides and fixtures in Syria and did this incredible master thread. And it turns out she's a young Swedish woman trained as a lawyer who's currently working in Afghanistan. She just found people on LinkedIn that had companies in Afghanistan and got a business development job there. And before that, she spent 6 months working in Riyadh, and before that, 6 months working in Rio, just working and experiencing the world. And that's
good for her. Wow.
I until I interviewed her last week, I knew nothing about her except that I had her to thank for getting my UN 193. So it's been a good group, and very happy to be part of it.
Very cool.
Can we talk a little bit about, you sort of skipped through this when you were talking about going to Syria, a little bit of the ethical dilemma or not dilemma with going to some of these places, whether it's a place that is a conflict zone or it has a complicated government, and do we support or do we not support? And I know, Ben, this is something that you struggle with a lot too. It's like, should I go here because they're sort of terrible, or should I go here because they're sort of terrible, but humans themselves, aren't?
Yeah. Years ago, I wrote some posts on ethical dilemma for one country in particular, and it's something that I struggle with a lot. A classic example is Myanmar or Burma, that the overseas community of activists for years were very much against or promoting that they should totally isolate the regime and not travel there. And I did go there. I was living in China. I went over there on a holiday. One aspect of it is the reality is there was so much Chinese money flowing into the country that tourist dollars were not making a difference to the regime, but they were making a huge difference to the local guides that I found on Lonely Planet, Thorn Tree Forum, which is now out of commission, but trying to find local businesses, so you're not necessarily giving money as directly to a government as possible. And in a case like that, or any territory like that I've seen those debates, when I go there and make the effort to meet locals and meet and put what little commerce I have and what connections I have there, I've never gotten the sense, I've never been told, I've never gotten the reaction that, please, you shouldn't have come here. There's difficulties about it. I mean, I see in the comments a few of the red hat types, which I have very different views on, but I've seen very few people that become worse people by traveling the world, and at the same is the chance to meet people from any country, in particular, say an American, where there's so much about us in the world, and the amount of ways that we have impacted people's lives in almost every country, or effectively every country in the world, is in cases that we often have absolutely no idea or no understanding. And just pick your play. I mean, pick the U.S. policy on the Kurdish people, or the U.S. policy on Iran and Iraq, and you can look at going back decades, just trace the career of some of the long-serving U.S. political figures and the different administrations from the 70s to today, of how we were on one side, then on another, then on this side, then war. It's incredible impacts we've had, and so I've never hidden that I'm an American. I'm always very open about it. I always try to listen and learn and share my experience and my view, and I've always felt that in that way I've been positive in some way. It's a hard call. I saw Ben's post about Tanzania, for instance, and I'm very willing to speak politics, and I'm very open, and I believe in Rick Steves'. You should look at his lectures, Travel as a Political Act. I think it's important to speak out and disagree, but do it in a way that's engaging. And I think, like, Ben's post is appropriate. It's speaking to an issue that he's passionate about. I personally support, others may not, but speaking about it in a way that's open, and that dialogue is the way forward. And I think it's the idea that travel is not political. You can put your head in the sand, but you're out in the world. I mean, you look at
even just going back to the example you gave of the woman you met from Syria, who she can't travel.
Hmm.
Like that's the baseline. Like you can travel, so there's a political baseline to that. We're starting with that assumption. Makes sense.
Yeah,
Pretty
and
balanced.
it's you know, governments are what they are, and they reflect people, but but they also are separate from the people of any given place, and it's something that when you go and learn and experience a place. I think some of the questions were about surprises or things. I mean, there's no place that hasn't been different than the stereotypes or things you see. There's always daily life going on. I mean, I've said in a joking way about, because I don't have kids, as I've said. I'm married, and my wife, of course, has concerns about places I travel, but it's of course difference having kids. But people say, oh, I can't imagine traveling with kids to X place or Y place, and I always say, well, why do they have kids there too? You know,
Yeah.
they
That's something
are
that I
human.
love about Travis. Like he and Amy have taken their kids all over. They took two kids under the age of 3 to Myanmar, and they were like, "What?
Yeah,
There's kids
and
here."
Michael W. also on boarding area. He's taken his. I mean, there's so many that have taken their, and they often have. I mean, they have different and often better experiences because in so many cultures, if a kid is around, that is everybody's kid for that moment. You know, everybody circles around and becomes part of it. So in some ways, I wish I had a kid to travel with and
I'm sure there are
experience that.
many parents now that we're on
Yeah,
like week 10 here of quarantine who would be
yeah.
like, "What? You'd like to take my child to a foreign country?"
Le-
Absolutely.
legal,
Like
legally, it
here's
is difficult. You need permissions, and there's good reasons why you need permissions. But conceptually, I can agree with that. But yeah, I've been very political on my blog in times and stated my reasons for it and why I stay that way. And the one thing I do reject is when people say it's travel, not politics. I think is it the site Visual Capitalist just has a infographic of um, the amount of the economy and jobs in different territories that depend on tourism, and some of these are up to 90 something percent, and this is integral. It's tourism as an industry is fragmented in many ways, so it doesn't have, say, the political heft of, say, like an oil lobby, which might be two or three companies that effectively control an economy, but they have this incredible spread of influence on people's daily lives.
Would you travel, or does your wife ever have concerns about places you go in terms of safety? Is she worried for your safety? And if you had kids and you weren't traveling with them, are there certain places you wouldn't go out of safety concerns because you don't want something to happen to you and you have kids, or would
Yeah, certainly it would totally change, and that's honestly part of the disagreement over the years, and
well, when you were going to Syria, she told you to pack a coat because
well, so
you
I've
sort of
never I've never I've
skipped
never
past
lied.
that.
I've never lied, and we have a standard template I fill out that she's agreed to of all the contacts, so the hotels, the flight numbers, everything. But this one was in such a rush, and English is not her first language, and so sometimes she's translating the countries, and then so I'm booking this in a rush. I'm going. It's August. I'm from Minnesota, and she says, did you pack a jacket? As I'm going running out to Seattle Airport to try to catch this flight, and I say, no, it's August. I think I'm going to be okay, and 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 then she said, but are there bears there? I said, what? Bears? I said, I have no idea, but I'm not going to some national park. And
But you do go to national parks, so I feel like that's a valid
I've
concern. In
started
fact, I think
visiting
there's a
U.S.
story
national
about you
parks, which
breaking
are
into a
wonderful.
national park at some point.
Yeah, but it just wasn't the thing you'd be thinking would be asked. And so a few days later, I'm sitting in Damascus over dinner, just pondering, still jet lagged and running full speed, and I just realized, Syria, Siberia, and then I connected the dots. So it was actually a barbecue I was supposed to be at for the holiday. That some friends said, no, Stefan's not in Siberia, he's in Syria. So that required.
Was she more worried when she realized you're in Syria, or?
Yeah, I mean, part of it, she's been much more tolerant over the years than I have any right to deserve. But I had given her all of the information, all of the contacts. I was in touch. I mean, there's data roaming and all of that I had. So I was in contact constantly. She was hearing from me, and she knows that I don't take, it's all relative, but I don't take the kind of chances that some people, as I said, I'm not seeking out war zones. I stayed far, far away from any of that. I mean, areas I was in, people were doing their back to school shopping, and so in all kinds of situations, two of the baselines you can choose either or both is, are the old folks about? Because the old folks patrol pretty much any community around the world. If they're out and walking around and comfortable, then you're going to be probably a good indication. And then also, are the women and children out and about? And if they're out and about feeling safe and shopping, that's an indication that things are better than they might otherwise be. Plus also being out early in the morning. And I've got my 3Ds, which I think you've heard in some of my travel talks, is don't be drunk, drugged, or debauched. And a lot of what happens to travelers is either road accidents or things that start out with, drinking late at night in a country where you don't speak the language, don't know who to call, don't know the legal system. So I live in Seattle. I've not tried marijuana products. I'm perfectly fine that it's legal. I've got the only shop across the street that I can view from my window is a pot shop. And if I'm going to experiment with that stuff, I'm going to do it here where I know who to call. I know what the legal system is and all of that. And I'm not going to try it in a country that's different just because it might be cheaper or seem more exotic. And that's something that I keep in mind, especially since a lot of my travel is solo. So I'll seldom drink on the road. It's only if it's a business setting and it's part of the social dynamic that I might have a drink or two. And that served me well. Not getting cocky. I mean, another thing about safety is, and there's some questions about Yemen. I went to Socotra. There's no guns on Socotra other than some military force. There's been no fighting. There's been no attacks of any kind during the entire Yemen conflict. It's totally different than going to the mainland. But I know a number of people have gone to the mainland, and it's not a chance I would have taken in the past year. And they too often say nothing happened, so it's safe. And my reaction is nothing happened means nothing happened. It didn't mean it's
right,
safe.
It doesn't mean nothing will happen or that it is
yeah.
safe.
And so I try to be very cautious about that and go to places when the time is right. And as I said, Syria, I mean, people were trying all kinds of ways to get in, and I waited over 2.5 years. I couldn't get a visa, but also, I mean, there were plenty of one-way options that I could have taken. So there's
right. There's always, yeah. So thinking about like when to go someplace, and Bernadette asked this too, like when will you start traveling and where will you go, or at least like what is sort of the thought and discussion process that's happening in your household in terms of how will we know when this is a reasonable thing for us to be doing and where will we go first? And
I have the only crystal ball that's 100% accurate, so you've asked the right person.
Well, I'm not saying this is what other people should do, but I think it's something that we've asked almost everybody about. Like, how are you thinking about this? Because there's not a right answer.
Somewhat related to the safety discussion, I feel like because we're all so focused on this particular issue, we've all made ourselves into experts on something we can't really be expert in, because even the trained experts don't really know. So I'm being very cautious. I do not have a specific need to be traveling. So any travel that I would take, I would only rationalize as helping the economy, which is a real concern and something I think about. I mean, it goes down to this, should bloggers be talking about supermarket bonuses on credit cards, because that's going to encourage a lot of the audience to be going to the supermarket to buy a lot more than groceries, right? So there's a lot of this tug and pull between, but going to the supermarket may keep supermarket workers in jobs and all of that. So I struggle, like I think any serious person does, with the trade-offs of what economic activity is responsible and helpful versus what is frivolous. And I don't have a reconciliation in my head as the situation changes of what that looks like. But specifically to travel and destinations, it will be entirely a household decision. If it weren't, then I would have to accept and expected to be asked to quarantine somewhere nearby for 2 weeks coming back on that. So it's entirely something. So my wife and I, we have a standing calendar meeting, and we don't use it every week, but on Friday we have it booked on the calendar to discuss any change to our virus procedures. So she said, I can check the mail this number of days of the week. I can go to the grocery store once every other week, these kind of things. And if we want to change that, we're going to have try to have a non-emotional discussion at a set time rather than it being something spontaneous that can bring extra stress in that. And we've had our stressful moments, I think, like any couple or family. But having it as it's actually what we do it's the process that she instituted for travel hacking and all the points and miles stuff, which is
because actually no one wants to hear about it on a whim, right? When you're like over the coffee in the morning and you're like, oh, and this is like, I don't care.
Yeah, and that was exactly it, because it's like Ben, of course, he's posting 10 times a day, and it's always the 7 a.m. crazy fare deal to Australia, and I'm trying to wake her up and say, we got to book this thing, what dates work, and she's so she said it's every other week I can have one practical meeting where I can bring up any points and miles related thing, as well as whatever taxes, bill pay, any kind of practical task for the household, and any deal that can't wait till that time. If it's gone, too bad. If it's good enough and it's still around, we can we can do it. And that's just the way it's got to be. And no changes to her tickets within two weeks of departure. Do not touch her accounts. She has to, of course, book anything that uses her accounts. And it's been a great discipline, because I realized I was undisciplined in terms of using what I feel comfortable with and the spontaneity I feel comfortable with for a subject that she doesn't like and enjoy, but she does like some of the trips when it's on her terms. And so we have, I guess that's a big diversion, but she has what we call spousal harmony trips, where she just declares a trip. So like a few years ago, we were in New York, and I think it was middle of June, and she just walked up and said, 4th of July weekend, Friday or Saturday departure, Australia, single connect, business class, prefer Asian carrier, and especially Korean. And, that was it. So,
which is great, because that's the best time to book that anyway. So that last minute.
It actually worked. It did end up working out, but because she said there's too many hours that I love my monitor more than her, and there's too many hours at midnight I'm looking at a screen instead of talking with her, watching a movie or whatever. So it's been great to rebalance. Okay, so I diverted too much.
No, that's
rambling
perfect.
travel.
So because actually somebody has a question that's perfect off of this.
About upcoming travel, and keep in mind I have family based in Asia and China and Taiwan, and they are horrified by, let's just call it, Americans' inability to display teamwork. So I lived in China during SARS. Okay, it's hot, it's a little bit of a hassle to wear a mask, I get it, but you can take a little bit for the team and do it for the common good, even if you don't think it's ideal. And I get a lot of frustration with people that are taking a huge economic impact, including me. I'm fine, but my business, which is my main business, is not travel related, but I'm certainly down like a third at this point, and it could get worse. And people with real economic pain, I'm extremely sensitive to. People that are getting their direct deposit with no change and are upset about any small inconvenience, that I have a lot less sympathy for. So we're
should maybe not come to Eastern Washington.
Yeah. It's so all that gets around is that if we feel like it's responsible, and we could spend, say, a month in a place and go through whatever procedures are needed to be safe. Taiwan, the way they've managed it, incredible risk. I've not actually spent all that much time in Taiwan, so I've been wanting to see more anyway, and just base ourselves for a month or two there. Hong Kong, we were in
and Taiwan
January.
is in one of those situations where they have the, not necessarily good fortune, but the experience of dealing with SARS fairly recently. And their, I believe, vice president is an epidemiologist.
Yeah.
So,
as I understand, I'm not positive. I think we could go now, and even as U.S. citizens, and go through the 14-day quarantine. It's also really hot there in summer, so that's a bit of a problem. But South Korea and Japan, if the situation allowed, we'd feel very comfortable. So it'd be a situation where we feel comfortable. Ideally, there would be a responsible a responsible solution. Again, I'm not an expert in terms of testing and all of that. That wouldn't require 2 weeks locked in, because then it wouldn't be worth it to us to travel in that sense. So hoping that maybe by the fall, some form of that would be possible, and just basing ourselves somewhere. And that wouldn't be entirely different than in a normal year with my wife and I. We would take 2 trips of like 2 to 3 weeks. January, we were in Hong Kong for a few weeks. We were going to spend our birthday in June in Australia. That's off, but hoping. We do have a Hong Kong on the books for late November that we haven't canceled and are hoping would be possible and responsible and safe. Let's see, how many countries have I traveled with my wife to? So we've been to, she just totaled it up, it's 30 something she's been to, and it's mainly, she does a lot of repeats. So a lot of Canada, Australia, she particularly loves. Asia a couple times a year, so we run out of time. But a few, like Saudi Arabia was one of the funnest, where her experience is naturally so different than mine, that being us together there, standing together, and we're just getting a totally different. The second we leave Saudi Arabia and arrive and connecting in Dubai, and there's one security. Dubai has those little like metal detectors in customs arrival, and they have one line for men and women, and she looks at me, "Where's the women's line?" And and that, but yet at a Marriott in Jeddah, we check in and they say, "Oh, the men's spa is on the second floor and it's open, this and this," and she says, "Where's the women's spa?" And they confer and discuss and look at their phones, and well, there's one about 5 kilometers away that you can get in. So just all of these different kinds of experiences, and hearing the stories of say when she would go to the bathroom somewhere and try to adjust her scarf. So I think they even, at the time, women had to wear a baya, which is the cloak, which we got on Amazon. Didn't have to cover their head, but she just wore a colorful headscarf anyway, just out of respect. And I think even the abaya requirements have been reduced a bit on paper, and the religious police are what's to say the word? Their authority to enforce has been drastically curtailed. So I know a Filipino traveler, a woman who just actually walked into Mecca, where she just went up to the religious authorities and said, "Here, this is me. I'd like to visit. Can I go in?" And they talked about it and said, "Yes, you can go visit Mecca." So, the country's going through a lot of change, and she didn't sneak in. She didn't lie. She said exactly who she is. She's a Christian. She's this, that. And they exchanged Instagram accounts and let her and her companion, a Dutch man, go in and respectfully look around. So, a lot of things are sometimes possible.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So you can use all your persuasive skills to get Walmart to sell you money orders, or you can use all your persuasive skills to visit some of the great religious sites in the world.
Right. A little bit of a pivot, but this is going back to what you were saying about, like, here's this crazy deal that happens, and like, should I book it or should I not book it, without necessarily having had the time to think about it. And Brandon had a question earlier, which made me laugh, because I think Brandon has an Air France ticket from Algeria, was I think the inspiration. But thoughts on Algeria? How horrible was the process to get a visa when you did it?
The visa was difficult, is difficult. There's been occasional rumblings that an e-visa of some form would appear. It hasn't. Now with all the disruptions, I doubt. So you're going to have to deal with one of your consulate or embassy in the region. So I was living in New York at the time, so I dealt with the New York one. For them, I've heard that sometimes it's one that a number of countries in former Soviet orbit or in Africa, so some of the non-aligned movement countries, if you go way back, will require to get your visa in your country of residence or home country. For Algeria, I've not heard so much along those lines. So one strategy, if you don't get it in one, you can try, if you were to be traveling and somewhere else, you're in London or somewhere that has one, you could also try. It's definitely not on arrival. It is a fantastic country. Constantine is one of my favorite cities in the world. It's incredibly vertical, these bridges and hills. Algiers, I mean, the Casbah, there's a reason the name is famous in history. Some of the greatest Roman ruins in the world that you'll have entirely on your own, even in a normal year. And then far in the south, some of the desert oasis towns are incredible. So if you booked that fare, please don't just go there and turn around. I've still not seen the Colosseum in Rome because I've seen so many great coliseums in Tunisia and different places in North Africa that are almost as big.
And mainland Italy's Roman ruins are in terrible condition. Like,
and they would normally be covered by, and that's what I mean. I feel like I've seen these pristine, in a sense, ruins because of the climate and that, with just me and the goats. So really incredible. But it is a complicated visa. It's expensive, and I just don't think many countries are going to change too much if tourism wasn't ours. So like the Caribbean type one, St. Lucia's opening up because that's their industry, and they're going to take any potential risk. I don't think countries that haven't been in the habit of changing quickly are necessarily going to do something, but maybe they'll surprise us.
Right, but the St. Lucia situation is fascinating because it really seems to be catering to the people who wanted a beach vacation. So it's basically you can come, you stay at your resort, and here's the rules at your resort, which I feel like many of the people who were going to go to St. Lucia were going to stay at the resort the whole time anyway. So it's not really an imposition other than, some staggering and scheduling of meal times within it. But the press release that we saw was very regulated, these taxis, no public transportation. You can't leave the resort until you're going back to the airport unless you're on a specific thing with your hotel.
Yeah, and I guess I would also add, if maybe not necessarily St. Lucia for so many people, but any place where you're going to be connecting somewhere else is something that I would be very cautious about, because all these rules can change and you could get stuck somewhere in the middle or not have a way out. I mean, you think about in a totally different circumstance last year when United pulled the Yap to Manila flight, and so all these Filipino nationals that live and work in Yap couldn't legally get home for a while because they're not allowed to transit Guam, and nobody thought, we're just marooning these people here. Goodness. So what should I do about all of these questions? So should I try to answer them all really fast? I shouldn't take over your show. What's the best way there's been a huge backlog. So
yeah, we answer some, we don't answer others. It's,
How about I'll try to rapid fire. So Priority Pass Lounge in Damascus Airport. I did not go to the airport because flights are very limited. But Beirut has some decent lounges, including the Sky Team is one of the most artistic and has true antiquities in the MEA. Well, they have several, but the big MEA one has several antiquities. Hyatt stuff, I don't really know about Hyatt stuff, to be honest. How do you count visiting someplace? There's many, many answers to it. And
I think it was how do you count?
How do I count?
How do you count?
Generally, it's so I visit, so I feel like I don't have to go back, but I may very much want to go back. So I had many transits and overnights in places like Amsterdam or Istanbul, but it wasn't until I had a 10-day trip across Turkey, that road trip across Turkey, that I counted it. Others, San Marino, I spend the day. I don't feel like I have to spend the night. Let's see, Wisconsin Dells, yes, awesome. Minneapolis, yes. And let's see, if Stefan had to choose between Ben and Tiffany, who would he choose? So I had Tiffany as a guest in EPS. I haven't tracked down Ben yet. That's an impossible answer. So I've had incredible travel experiences with both. I can give two Ben stories. So because he looks nervous and he's worried about being embarrassed. But people assume the 5-star hotels. But I have walked through Manhattan at midnight looking for open bubble tea shops with him, and so he is a real human and an enjoyable, delightful person.
Bubble tea used to be my passion as well, not as much because they don't have good bubble tea in Miami, but I am so on board with bubble tea always.
I wonder what would happen if you tried to order bubble tea in Miami.
You would probably get I can't even imagine. It would be a disaster.
Yeah, like I don't know the Spanish for it's not possible, but
Seattle. I won't do the rant about the place in Seattle that I heard when I made my wife stand in line for that.
Drive-through boba. Oh my God, I remember your wife was not impressed. Unfortunately, they just closed down. Apparently, very sad.
Oh no, I don't wish any business to fail or suffer like that. It's like people Hertz stiffed me for a $10 overcharge. I'm glad they're bankrupt. They just laid off 10,000 people and 22,000 more have their jobs on the line. That's a great perspective. But the other Ben story is last time I saw him was in Hong Kong, and my wife and I were in the Sky Team lounge waiting for the Delta flight. I had never been to the Amex Centurion, and of many years going to Hong Kong, I had almost always been coming across from Shenzhen, a flight there, or a train, or different things. So I've not been in Hong Kong airport nearly as much. I had no idea how much time it takes to go to the Centurion and then get yourself back. And so it was already like final call. She was in a panic. Is she just going to leave my carry-on in the lounge and get to the flight? And so she's in a panic. And then she says, oh, by the way, one of those travel bloggers is here taking pictures of everything. And I look around, hey, Ben, you're going to Charleroi or something. We had to run. We didn't get a chance to talk. So, what is the easiest and most economical place you visited? I don't know. I guess Southeast Asia is the default for a lot of people, and that's easy and fun. I mean, if you want easiest and economical in these times, get yourself a national parks pass and drive around the U.S. That's the national parks. It's an incredible deal. Let's see. Anything else I missed, Tiffany? You're also moderating.
No, I mean, those are the big things. It's one of the things I love about these is we have a group of regulars now. So we end up having like really fun conversations happening in the comments that are just sort of this really fascinating sidebar. There's not always, and then Sean is here and he's talking about how somehow he's going in and out of countries without getting his passport stamped all the time, which on Thursday we were talking about is because half the time he forgets to bring his passport, but he's on these routes so frequently because he, does operations for a big airline there. That there's like, oh, hey, Sean, and
they love. I have to re-listen to the Sean episodes because they're incredible. And the Erica Vervo is the explosion of Erica energy last week, and then you got me talking about human rights and
we weren't going to expect anyone to keep up with Erica in terms of enthusiasm on a Sunday morning, so no worries there.
Diane, have you ever booked a trip for you and your wife without asking her, and if so, how did she respond? She's had me just cancel trips if she didn't approve it, and that's fine. So she's clear of what the requirements are, and that's, as I said, it's all gotten me into a better discipline. I missed one. So no, you are redeemed. So on a Savorosity bug, I said yes, I had never redeemed ultimate rewards, which is true. They're always the ones I've thought, I used to think of them as the most valuable, so I would always redeem every other point first. And
you've still never redeemed them?
Well, now the issue is in December they shut all my accounts and won't tell me why. So I will.
This is that makes it much easier to not redeem them.
And I was not doing any of the things that would lead to it normally, and actually my true business account and my only business account with them is my actual business, and I don't even have any. The only UR cards I had at that point were Freedom at like the old Fairmont, and I wasn't putting huge spend doing any of the other I was mainly the hotel cards, so it could have been that I just wasn't doing more than one charge a year. It could have been other stuff. I am approaching
probably
6 months on that.
Not a name mismatch.
I'm extremely bitter on it in a way different than the typical entitled points traveler, in that I had the exact same experience applying for a PPP loan. Again, this is my primary bank for my business, and applying for a PPP loan was the exact same response as the shutdown, which is it doesn't matter who you find in branch managers, people senior, they have to call somewhere in corporate. Corporate tells them to pound sand, no information available, good luck. And that's it. So Sean is asking, do you think my shutdown may have been linked to some of your travel? So I've never used my Chase cards really, other than like a South Korea expense, just because they weren't primary cards, never debit card. I did think at one point in August when I was, I didn't even actually have a transaction. All I did was an ATM. The ATM had old bills, and so I walked into the branch and said, "Can you exchange for new bills?" And I did say something about like I've gone to every country in the world, and so I've got all these things in the back of my head, like, did this guy then write something down and put somewhere? Anything I could come up with was at least 3 to 4 months after when they did it. So,
which sounds about right for a big institution. 90 to 120 days to get themselves together.
Yeah, but I guess the issue is not totally closed, but the same thing with the PPP, which was I never got any communication on status or could get any branch person to get in, just like every other business owner, until the money was gone the first round, and then you got a form email saying the money's gone. And next time it'd be a good idea to look at other options, which, so I was stupid for in the second round. I was a little smarter and applied like 20 different of the new funders, blue vine, cabbage, all that, and it worked out, and that's been very helpful for my business. But just that process of, you just can't be treated like an adult. I mean, it's truly, it's just, we don't have to tell you, so we don't have to. And the branch manager that you built up a relationship for a few years is saying they won't even, have the courtesy to tell me. My concept of banking is that the bank branch manager should at least be able to know the customer and be able to interact with the customer like an adult. And that's in two very different situations.
Benefit to local banks.
Yeah, and I understand that Chase is a big bank, and I don't rate, and I shouldn't have priority in the queue, and all of that stuff. I mean, just clearly they have enough time to be able to allow their branch managers to get information. I mean, the shutdown related thing, I mean, this was over the period of a few months when nothing was going on. I mean, there's nothing that would be related. So yeah, so Justin, so everybody's okay, so we're going into the big Chase thing. So we'll spend all Sunday. Okay, yeah. I do work for a client that is involved in some that may be involved in some blockchain thing, and they were shut down by Chase because they were looking to get into that business, and Chase said they could not get into that business, but a shutdown for my business accounts, which Chase has never had a problem. So I still have my business checking and my business Marriott card. It was just the personal, the personal card, the credit cards, and the checking, savings, and my Starbucks prepaid card. That was the last one. If people really want it funny, the Starbucks prepaid card wasn't actually included in the shutdown, and I was told that. And when they closed the savings, because I was working on a new bonus, they deposited $25,000 for my savings into my prepaid card instead of cutting me a check. And and when I called them up and I got compliance on the phone, they said, well, automatically the system rolls over to whatever account is still open. And I said, one, you said you're giving me a check, and two, what am I supposed to do with $25,000 of Starbucks? Well, just go to our ATM, which it's like $300 a day you can take out, at $1.20 fee or whatever, And so that was many escalations later just to get a check and cash out, or they said I could go to a branch and they could sort it out. And I said, when I wanted this problem solved the first time, I went to a branch and you told them that you wouldn't do them the courtesy of even telling them what was going on. So I'm not going to go to a branch to help you guys out. So, and I've heard odd things that, like maybe months later the business accounts go. So I had been planning to totally move my business accounts out anyway, just as a precaution, because I can't risk, they turn off my personal credit cards and I can't charge. Okay, that's fine. I logged in, noticed it. But if it, a client pays me and the check bounces, that's not good. So I've got to go through that process. And after, so how did Ben end up in the middle? He disconnected, and I guess last one in is there. And I've talked so much.
The live stream just spluttered, so it resorted itself. We don't really know how it works. I love how you're like, I want to do this so I can see how your technology works. That's not what we do here.
How does someone without Facebook connect with you? I am deeply interested in far-flung travel. I can put my blog, which has all the contact. I use Facebook for the group because it's got the most reach to travelers that are around the world and haven't necessarily found about other clubs or websites, or English may not be their first language. So the people that they're trying to get to every country in the world on an Indian passport or something. And Facebook is the place where any web addresses will be removed. So Tiffany, you'll have to post my blog. Okay. But but I'm Twitter. You can find me. I use that. And the blog has the different contacts. Stefan, STEF, as in Stefan Edberg, at rapidtravelchai.com. It's the same as the blog and the link. So happy to take any questions. And I've not let Ben talk at all. This is terrible. I haven't seen Ben in
That's sort
years.
of Ben's
and wanted to hear from
ideal
him.
Sunday morning live stream, actually. He's like, oh,
So that gets back to the question: do I choose Tiffany or Ben? I know he's shy, so that's the only reason I haven't tried to persuade and beg him to be on a video session in my Facebook group. But maybe
everybody's frozen. Okay, that's not good.
You're frozen. We didn't hear the response.
You frozen?
Everybody was frozen for a second, but I think we're unfrozen now.
Okay.
Well, this has been fun and fascinating. So thank you very, very much for joining us. And maybe I can join you sometime. That sounds fun too. Yes, and thank you. I think we got most of the things. So thanks to everyone who tuned in and joined us. And
I took an insult. My blog is not as interactive as the Facebook group. Yes, because there's bloggers like Ben that are too active, and I gave up years ago. So I love and read, and I also threw in the towel on that. So I'll get back. No, I'm just kidding. I'll get back to regular blogging at some point.
You're hilarious and a great writer. You should do more of it. But
support your non-corporate owned bloggers. Support Ben. Support Gary's.
Aw. Yeah, so on that note, we're going to wrap up because we've gone over, but you can hit the bell to be reminded for Thursday. We're going to make Thursday all about using miles. So we're going to have a couple of our friends who also do a lot with redeeming miles there, and just like bring your questions or like trips that you're looking at, and it should be fun, a little bit different. So thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you for the invite. Thank you all for watching.